Well, Tom, I think you're really on to something here. I think that certainly if you follow some of the other news outlets out there that don't focus on the facts, as yours does, you are going to get that sense of it. But I think what you've got here is something of a manufactured sense of energy out there. There certainly is frustration broadly on all sides of the aisle at the quality of government that they're getting. There's no question about that. But what we saw in these blue states, that's a good thing to remember. These were all very blue states here that had elections recently, is a tremendous amount of money being spent, a significant amount of new organizations being created by folks on the Democratic and liberal side, as high up as former President Obama. And really all they managed to do was win blue seats. So what we saw was a lot of resources, a lot of money being spent to really claw back to neutral in blue territory.
You know, Matt, you bring up an important point. I think this is something that's really critical for people to remember. You know, the map has shifted. I think that a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservatives around the country are used to viewing Virginia as a red state. But Virginia has not voted for a Republican presidential nominee in 4 or 5 cycles. And so really Virginia there is a new map out there, and Virginia, when it comes to Republicans, is not a red state. It's not even really a purple state anymore. I mean, arguably, I guess it is, but it's definitely a blue-leaning, a Dem-leaning state, and people just aren't used to viewing it that way.
There's a fundamental shift going on in American politics right now, and Tom, you're right again on this front, certainly from the presidential standpoint, but it goes deeper than that. They have 2 Democratic U.S. senators and have for multiple cycles. And Republicans haven't won a statewide seat for governor, lieutenant governor, or attorney general in the Commonwealth of Virginia in the last decade. And that's been the best decade for Republican politics in the history of this country. And so you're absolutely right. You've got a state that is now blue that was previously perceived as red or purple, and a big part of that is that Northern Virginia area, which is really a creature of the federal government and an extension of the swamp to some degree, with a huge boost in population because they're spending a lot of your listeners' tax dollars in that region of the state, and so that's the area that's growing more rapidly.
Well, and as you and I talked, and I think that, and this is Matt Walter gets the credit for this line, but the swamp, basically, when you look at what happened in Virginia, the swamp fought back, and the swamp pushed back on against Ed Gillespie. The swamp, which has been at war with the president, took that fight to the state level, and that's basically what we saw.
That's exactly right. Now, one of the other narratives that you'll hear out there is that Republicans are divided or Republicans are depressed. Well, the reality is Ed Gillespie got more votes than any of the previous candidates who were running for governor over the past several cycles. And in fact, if there hadn't been a significant spike in spending on the Democratic side, big registration drives, and the tip of the cap on that, operationally, they worked very hard. They outworked us and they outspent us in some regards. But his numbers would have beaten Terry McAuliffe. They would have beaten Bob McDonald, who won in the last time a Republican won by 20 points after Obama carried the state by 6 points. So you certainly saw that spike of energy on their side, but there's significant energy on the Republican side. We're going to need to get energized and spend more resources moving forward if we're going to be successful as the battle expands beyond just these blue states.
We're speaking with Matt Walter, president of the Republican State Leadership Committee, and we are analyzing Tuesday's elections. What were the real surprises? The real surprise for me, by the way, really, it wasn't the governor's races. New Jersey was going to flip Chris Christie, incredibly unpopular, probably the most unpopular governor in the country. His lieutenant governor was running to replace him. She unfortunately it just wasn't going to happen for her. So whatever happened in New Jersey, that's New Jersey. But in Virginia, just to go back to Virginia for a second, what really surprised me was, and we have heard the mainstream press talking about this, were these House of Delegate races, and there were more than a dozen of them were lost. What do you attribute those losses to?
Well, what we see in the House of Delegates race, and that really is one of the most interesting stories from election night, is the pure dollars that go into that. You typically see $1 million, maybe a couple $1 million that get pushed into those types of races from both sides. And you saw we're still looking at the numbers and categorizing everything, but you're seeing a spike of millions of dollars go in from liberal organizations from around the country. And they were there all year long, ever since the Resist movement started and the inauguration, once people sort of pulled themselves out of their wailing and rending of clothes that they had after the elections last year and started focusing on what they were going to do. They were in there registering voters, spending money, and the significant amount of money at the top of the ticket was all on knocking on doors, sending text messages, mobilizing folks, and pulling out the sector of the electorate, which turned out in good Democratic years going back to the Obama presidency, but were soft and off years, were soft for Hillary Clinton and led to her loss. And so you really saw, and again, you have to give credit to the operational efficiency of it and the ability to mobilize those resources. But what you're hearing now is more manufactured than authentic grassroots. Mm-hmm. That said, the reality is those seats were lost, and that should be a real wake-up call for folks around the country. Now, one quick thing, Tom, if I may.
Sure.
Still on that topic, there's 100 seats in the Virginia House of Delegates. 96 of those seats this time out performed the way they did in the presidential election. So if your district voted for Hillary Clinton, you came out and you voted for a Democrat to the House of Delegates. If your district voted for Donald Trump, you came out and voted for a Republican for the House of Delegates. There were only 4 seats that performed differently than the presidential. And 3 of those seats were Hillary Clinton seats that were picked up and carried by a Republican. And the one seat that President Trump carried by about 200 votes was a special election in January, and that was one that was won by a Democrat. So, again, it's a surprise at some levels, but at other levels, you're looking at a significant amount of resources and energy to really just get yourself back to what the generic is. Still a cause for concern with the resources, but a little bit overinflated as far as what the lessons are from it.